9 languages. A girl like you? Julian Croft's laugh wasn't just mocking, it was a weapon, sharp and cruel, slicing through the polite hum of the grand ballroom. He looked at Alara Vance, really looked at her, and saw nothing more than an obstacle. Stick to carrying trays, sweetheart. It's what you're good at. His hand, adorned with a platinum watch worth more than her entire college tuition, lashed out. It wasn't an accident. It was a statement. The motion was deliberate, a slow-motion act of contempt, striking the bottom of Alara's silver serving tray. A mosaic of expensive canapes exploded upwards, plastering themselves across the chest of her stark black uniform. An entire flute of crystal champagne followed, a cold, sticky cascade that drenched her collar and ran down her back. A shockwave of silence pulsed outwards from the impact. Nearby titans of industry, men who moved markets with a whisper, froze mid-sentence. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, darted between the 18-year-old black server, now dripping with champagne and humiliation, and the infamous CEO of Ethelred Innovations, Julian Croft, a man known for his genius and his utter lack of humanity. Alara's fingers, wrapped around the now empty tray, trembled with a rage so pure and hot it threatened to incinerate her composure. The acceptance letter from Princeton's legendary linguistics program felt like a burning ember in her pocket. It was her proof, her validation, a ticket to a world beyond this one, and in this moment, it felt like a lie. "Sir, I was just—" The words caught in her throat, strangled by shame. "You were just forgetting your place," Croft cut her off, his voice a low growl. His gold watch glinted under the crystal chandeliers as he meticulously brushed a speck of invisible dust from the sleeve of his Tom Ford suit. "This is a $500 million deal with our new global partners. We require professionals in this room, not clumsy, affirmative action hires pretending they belong." He turned his back on her, a final brutal dismissal, and addressed his inner circle in the flawless, practiced French of the corporate elite. Alara's jaw tightened until it ached. Oh, she belonged. In her mind, a torrent of responses erupted, a symphony of defiance in 9 distinct languages. She could have eviscerated him in German, shamed him in Japanese, or dismissed him with the lyrical contempt of Portuguese. Each retort was more fluent, more cutting, more culturally nuanced than his clumsy textbook French. But she said nothing. She couldn't. "You good, Alara?" Miguel, another server, whispered as they retreated to the chaos of the catering prep area. The air here was thick with the smell of food and the frantic energy of the underclass that made nights like this possible. "Croft is a world-class monster. Don't let him get to you." Alara mechanically straightened her name tag and used a napkin to wipe the last sticky droplets of champagne from her collar. "I'm fine." She was a liar. At 18, Alara Vance was no stranger to being underestimated. She had grown accustomed to the subtle surprise in a teacher's eyes when she aced an exam, the way security guards watched her a little too closely in upscale stores. But this was different. This was a public branding, a deliberate act of humiliation designed to remind her of her station. The daughter of a Ghanaian linguistics professor mother and a hard-working immigrant father who drove a taxi 12 hours a day, she had been raised in a house filled with books, languages, and the constant unspoken message that she would have to be twice as exceptional just to be considered equal. "My last catering gig before college," she reminded herself, a desperate mantra against the rising tide of fury. She glanced at her worn watch. 5 more hours of this gilded cage, 5 more hours of smiling and being invisible. Then she could go home, back to the comforting world of syntax and phonetics, and put the finishing touches on her scholarship applications. Princeton's linguistics program had granted her early admission, a miracle in itself, but the financial aid package had left a terrifying $15,000 gap. A gap this job, and a dozen others like it, was meant to slowly, painfully fill. "Did you see the guest list tonight?" Miguel motioned with his head toward the glittering ballroom. "They've got execs from Germany, Japan, China, Brazil, all over. Ethelred is trying to launch their new network protocol, Nexus, globally. This is the biggest deal in their history." Elara nodded, her hands moving with practiced precision as she arranged miniature quiches on a fresh tray. Languages had always been her sanctuary. When classmates in her predominantly white advanced placement classes whispered about whether she really belonged there, she would lose herself in the intricate beauty of Arabic script or the complex poetry of Russian literature. By 14, she was fluent in 5 languages. By 16, 9. "My mother says I have an ear for it," she would say when people expressed their disbelief. The reality was thousands of hours of relentless, obsessive study. It was late nights spent perfecting the tonal shifts of Mandarin until her throat was raw, and weekends spent volunteering as a translator at community legal clinics, giving a voice to those who had none. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her father, sent from his taxi somewhere in the sprawling metropolis. "Shine bright tonight, my star. Your future is so brilliant, I need sunglasses." A small, genuine smile finally broke through her carefully constructed mask. Her father's unwavering belief was the ultimate shield against the Julian Crofts of the world. The same man who worked double shifts to help pay for her textbooks, who listened to her practice verb conjugations on his dinner break, who never, ever let her believe that the limits others saw were real. Elara squared her shoulders, the fabric of her uniform still faintly damp. She lifted a fresh tray of appetizers. Princeton wasn't just her dream anymore. It was their shared mission. Between serving rounds, navigating the invisible currents of power and wealth in the ballroom, Elara retreated to the sterile anonymity of the staff bathroom. She pulled a worn, dog-eared set of flashcards from her pocket. Advanced Japanese business terminology. The summer linguistics program she'd attended at Columbia had stressed the importance of specialized language fluency for anyone aspiring to work at the UN or in international diplomacy. "Kayaku," she whispered, the Japanese word for contract, feeling solid and real on her tongue. She switched to Portuguese. "Contrato." Then German. "Vertrag." The familiar ritual was a balm to her frayed nerves, a way of recentering herself in a world that sought to throw her off balance. She had started this habit at 12, using every spare moment, on the bus, in line at the grocery store between classes, while her peers were lost in the endless scroll of social media. Her goal, the hyper-competitive UN translation program, demanded a level of mastery that went far beyond casual conversation. 2 minutes, Vance." The catering manager's sharp voice cut through the closed door, shattering her concentration. Back in the service corridor, a scene of quiet panic was unfolding. 2 of the event coordinators were huddled together, their faces pale. "The translation service just canceled. Canceled!" The woman with the headset hissed, her voice a tight knot of disbelief and terror. "A massive pileup on the Autobahn outside Frankfurt. Their entire team is stuck. The delegates are all arriving, and Julian Croft is going to literally murder someone." "Can't we use one of those translation apps?" her younger colleague suggested, his naivete almost painful. "For a $500 million technology deal? Are you insane? The nuances, the legal terminology, it would be a catastrophe." Elara's pulse began to hammer against her ribs as she loaded her tray. She understood, with a chilling clarity that no one else in this corridor could, exactly what was at stake. Her internship at the International Business Council the previous summer had been a crash course in high-stakes negotiations. She'd learned that direct, nuanced communication wasn't just important, it was everything. A single mistranslated clause could kill a deal, spark a lawsuit, or cost a company billions. Near the dessert station, a masterpiece of spun sugar and chocolate. She paused. She watched Croft demonstrating his company's new technology to a group of German investors. His German was technically perfect, a flawless recitation from a textbook. But it was culturally tone-deaf. She saw the German businessman's subtle wince, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes, as Croft used the informal do instead of the formal sigh. The investor's polite smile didn't match the stiffness in his posture. A classic, arrogant mistake, Ilara thought. In formal German business culture, premature familiarity wasn't friendly. It was a signal of profound disrespect. She had spent months studying these cultural nuances, understanding that language wasn't just a collection of words. It was a reflection of culture, a negotiation of power dynamics, a living history. The investor nodded mechanically, his initial enthusiasm visibly cooling. Croft, completely oblivious to his faux pas, plowed ahead with his rehearsed pitch, utterly blind to the silent signals that screamed the deal was in jeopardy. Sandra, the catering manager, gathered her staff for a final briefing before the main presentation. Her face was grim. "Remember what I told you all. Tonight, you are ghosts. These people are closing the biggest deals of their lives. They want their champagne flutes refilled without ever noticing you exist." Her gaze, hard and pointed, lingered on Ilara. "Especially you, Vance. After that little incident with Mr. Croft, I want you to stay completely out of his line of sight. Am I clear?" The warning was redundant. Ilara had mastered the art of invisibility years ago. She'd perfected it in honors classes where teachers' eyes slid past her raised hand, and in school hallways where security guards would stop her to check her ID, while her white classmates strolled by unchallenged. "Like ghosts," Sandra repeated, her voice sharp. "They shouldn't even register your presence." As the team dispersed, Ilara was assigned to the station nearest the Japanese delegation's table. The executives, believing themselves to be in a bubble of linguistic privacy, spoke freely in their native tongue, assuming no one could possibly understand them. "Croft-san is dangerously overconfident," one of the older executives murmured in Japanese, taking a delicate sip of sake. "His projected user adoption rates don't align with our independent market analysis." "The technology itself is impressive," another replied, his eyes on the stage. "But the licensing terms are a non-starter. If we cannot modify the source code for our domestic market, the risk is too high." Ilara maintained her serene, neutral expression, her face a perfect mask of disinterest. She gave no sign that she was absorbing information that could make or break the $500 million deal. At the adjacent table, a group of Arabic executives voiced similar concerns about data export restrictions under new Saudi regulations. The Brazilian team, a few feet away, debated market penetration timelines in rapid-fire Portuguese. It was a symphony of high-stakes commerce, and she was the only one in the room who could hear every instrument. A fellow server named Tyler nudged her as he passed. "Must be weird, huh? Listening to all this gibberish?" Ilara offered a tight, forced smile. "Just background noise." But it wasn't. It was everything. It was a flood of crucial, multi-million-dollar intelligence flowing freely around her, completely unprotected. Because who would ever imagine that the black girl clearing away the empty glasses, the girl told to be invisible, could possibly understand? This was the ultimate invisibility. And in it, she saw everything. As evening deepened, the grand ballroom underwent a transformation. The dinner settings were cleared with quiet efficiency, and technicians swarmed the stage, setting up a massive screen for Croft's formal presentation. Elara circulated with a silver coffee service, her mind no longer on her duties, but on the complex web of concerns she had overheard. She was mentally mapping the room, not by table numbers but by anxieties. The Japanese, cautious, detail-obsessed, needing reassurance on customization rights. The Germans, put off by Croft's brash style, seeking guarantees of long-term stability. The Russians, deeply skeptical about data security, a key sticking point. And the Brazilians, Saudis, Chinese, French, Spanish, and Swahili-speaking Kenyan representatives. Each delegation had a specific, critical concern that Croft's team seemed utterly oblivious to. Croft stood at the center of it all, a king in his court, radiating a confidence that bordered on megalomania. "Once this Nexus deal closes tonight," he announced to his inner circle, "Ethelred Innovations will dominate 9 of the world's major markets. Nothing can stop us." His assistant, a young man with a permanently panicked expression, scurried to his side. "Sir, we have a situation with the translations." "What situation?" Croft's voice was dangerously calm. "We booked the top service in the world 6 months ago. They just called. Their entire team was in a multi-car pileup in Germany. The flight from Frankfurt was cancelled. They're not going to make it." Croft's smile didn't falter, but it became something hard and brittle. "This is the most important presentation of my life, and we have no translators." "We've called every agency in the city, sir. There's no one available on such short notice who can handle this level of technical specificity in 9 languages. Elara slowed her movements, her body going cold as she absorbed the full magnitude of the crisis. These delegates had flown thousands of miles, rearranging their lives for this one night. Rescheduling wasn't an option. It would mean a catastrophic loss of momentum, and very likely the collapse of the entire deal. "Translation apps?" Croft demanded, a desperate edge to his voice. His chief technology officer winced. "They're too imprecise for the legal terms and technical specifications, sir. We'd risk catastrophic misunderstandings. The liability—" "Then find me a solution in the next 30 minutes. Croft's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Or every single one of you can find a new job on Monday." His team scattered like frightened birds, pulling out phones, making frantic, hopeless calls. From across the room, Elara caught Miguel's eye. He gave her a long, knowing look. They both understood the crushing irony. The solution was already in the room. Invisible, underestimated, and holding a silver coffee pot. Elara slipped into the service corridor, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Through the swinging doors of the kitchen, she could hear the rising panic in the voices of Croft's team. "Try Harvard's language department. Columbia, NYU, there has to be someone." "It's a Friday night. We need 9 languages simultaneously. It's impossible." She leaned against the cool, tiled wall, a war raging within her. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, a constant refrain from her childhood. "Your gift with languages isn't just for you, Elara. It's for building bridges where other people only see walls." But the practical, cynical side of her, the side that had been forged in a world of slights and microaggressions, countered fiercely. This job was tuition money. Stepping forward meant risking not just tonight's wages, but her reputation with the catering company, her only source of income. Sandra had been crystal clear. Invisibility was job security. Through the small, circular window in the kitchen door, she watched Julian Croft pacing like a caged panther, barking orders into his phone. The same man who had deliberately humiliated her, who had looked at her as if she were less than human, was now facing a crisis of his own making. A crisis she could solve with a single sentence. She saw the Japanese delegation consulting their watches, their patience clearly wearing thin. The Germans were exchanging concerned glances, their initial skepticism now hardening into a decision. The Kenyan representatives had begun to quietly gather their briefcases, preparing for an early and definitive exit. A $500 million deal, the culmination of years of work, the foundation of a company's future, was collapsing in real time. All because the one person in the building with the answer had been told to be a ghost. Miguel appeared at her side, his expression urgent. "You know all those languages, don't you? All 9 of them." Ilara didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the unfolding disaster. "I've heard you practicing," he pressed. "It's 9, right? The exact ones they need." "And get fired for speaking out of turn?" she finally whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Or worse." She retreated to the small, windowless staff break room, setting down her coffee pot with a hand that shook slightly. 10 minutes. She had a 10-minute break. 10 minutes to decide the course of her future. Her phone buzzed. It was an automated text from Princeton's financial aid office. "Deadline for supplemental scholarship application is Monday at 5 p.m. Without additional aid, your acceptance will be released to waitlisted students." The timing was so cruelly perfect, it felt like a cosmic joke. Step forward and risk this job, this income, her entire professional standing. Or stay silent, stay safe, and watch her dream of Princeton evaporate into thin air. She opened her family chat group, a photo from her father, a selfie from inside his taxi, a wide, tired grin on his face. The caption read, "Working an extra long shift tonight for the Princeton Fund." Below it, a message from her mother. "Remember what I always tell you about your gifts, my love." Ilara did remember. Her mother, who had given up a prestigious university post in Accra to marry an American taxi driver, had faced her own brutal battles with prejudice and underestimation. "Never hide your light because some people find it blinding," she would always say. "That is their problem, my dear, not yours." But this wasn't an inspirational poster. This was real life, with real, devastating consequences. Through the thin door, she heard Croft's voice, raw with desperation. "We can proceed in English only. Surely everyone here has a working knowledge of—" His voice was cut off by a chorus of firm objections in at least 3 different languages. Ilara closed her eyes, weighing the terrifying possibilities. Best case? She saves the day, becomes a momentary hero, and then is promptly forgotten. Worst case? She is humiliated again, this time on a grander scale, fired on the spot, and blacklisted from the catering circuit that paid her bills. The most likely outcome, she knew, was somewhere in the middle. A moment of recognition, followed by the quiet, convenient forgetting of the black girl who dared to step out of her designated place. Her break timer chimed on her phone, a shrill, insistent beep. Decision time. Miguel appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "They're leaving, Ilara. The Japanese delegation just called for their car." Ilara stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She smoothed the front of her still damp uniform. Sometimes, the only way to avoid disappearing completely is to risk being seen. She found the event coordinator, a harried woman named Diane, juggling 2 phones and a tablet, a storm of crisis swirling around her. 3 different languages echoed from her devices as one agency after another declined the impossible last-minute request. "Excuse me," Ilara said, her voice quiet but clear. "I might be able to help with the translation issue." Diane barely glanced up from her screens. "We've got it covered, thanks." "But I said we've got it." Diane's tone sharpened, frayed by stress. "Unless you've suddenly become a UN-certified multilingual translator instead of a catering server, please return to your station." Ilara held her ground, a flicker of her father's stubbornness igniting within her. "I actually speak all 9 of the languages you need. fluently. This earned her a full, dismissive once-over. The woman's eyes catalogued her uniform, her youth, her race, and made a swift, damning calculation. Right. And I'm the Queen of England. Look, we are in the middle of a 5-alarm fire here. I don't have time for your jokes. It's not a joke. I can demonstrate. Do you have any idea what is at stake? Diane's voice rose, attracting the attention of several of Croft's anxious team members. This is a $500 million international technology deal, not a high school French final. These are CEOs and government attachés dealing with technical specifications and complex legal clauses. Ilara felt her resolve begin to waver under the heat of their collective scorn. I've studied business and legal language specifically, she persisted, her voice quieter now. I can handle the terminology. Diane set down her devices, turning to face Ilara fully. Her expression was a mask of utter contempt. Let me be crystal clear. Even if you, by some impossible miracle, spoke 9 languages, which you don't, no one is going to entrust critical, high-stakes negotiations to a teenage catering server. Now, unless you want me to have a very serious conversation with your manager, I suggest you get back to serving coffee. Foy, the dismissal stung more than Croft's physical shove. It wasn't just rejection. It was the absolute, unshakable certainty in Diane's eyes that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly possess the skills she claimed. It was a judgment not on her abilities, but on her very existence in this space. Ilara retreated, her cheeks burning with a fresh wave of humiliation. Near the grand ballroom exit, she passed the Japanese delegation leader speaking urgently with his assistant. We cannot proceed without proper translation, he said in crisp, formal Japanese. The technical specifications have too many potential pitfalls. The risk of misunderstanding is unacceptable. His assistant nodded gravely. I have called for the car. We can reconsider when they have sorted out their communication issues. Ilara kept walking, a ghost once more, her invisible, world-class talents walking right out the door with them. The atmosphere in the ballroom had curdled, shifting from anticipatory excitement to a thick, anxious tension. Delegation members were checking their phones, whispering amongst themselves as Croft's team continued their frantic, fruitless search for a solution. Tablets at each table with translation apps? Croft's CTO suggested, his voice laced with desperation. We tested those, his assistant shot back. The financial terms translate incorrectly in 3 of the languages, and the Japanese translation of the technical specs is complete gibberish. Ilara circulated with a fresh pot of coffee, a silent observer at the scene of a corporate train wreck. The Brazilian delegates were openly consulting flight schedules. The Saudi representatives were on their phones, likely arranging hotel extensions or early departures. No one was even looking at the hastily prepared presentation materials, knowing they were useless without accurate translation. Perhaps we reschedule, suggested the German investor in heavily accented English, his tone making it clear it was not a genuine offer. When proper professional translators are available. Croft's smile remained fixed and rigid, but the whitening of his knuckles around the edge of his tablet betrayed his rising panic. An unavoidable delay now means our competitors could move first. We would all lose a significant market advantage. The French delegation leader responded in a torrent of rapid French, his frustration palpable. Ilara understood every word. This level of disorganization is appalling. It makes us question the viability of the entire partnership. If they cannot arrange something as fundamental as communication, what other critical details have they overlooked? Croft nodded as if he understood, but Ilara saw his subtle, desperate glance toward a translation app on his phone that had only managed to capture half the statement correctly. Meanwhile, the Chinese representatives conferred amongst themselves in Mandarin. Without a proper translator to verify the technical claims in real time, We cannot proceed. The risk of fraud or misunderstanding is simply too high." Elara refilled their cups, her expression placid, betraying nothing of the multilingual storm of dissent she was witnessing. The misunderstandings were compounding, breeding distrust. Croft's team was completely blind to the critical concerns that, if addressed, could still save the deal. Her phone vibrated again. Another automated message from Princeton. "Please confirm your supplemental scholarship interview time for Monday. Without completion of this step, your acceptance status will be in jeopardy." This was it. The final push. The pay from this single catering job would barely cover the cost of her textbooks, but losing Princeton would shatter her entire future. Miguel passed her, his tray empty. "They're all about to walk. The Germans and Japanese are leading the charge. You're really going to just let this happen?" Elara watched Julian Croft, the architect of her humiliation, making increasingly desperate promises in fractured, inadequate phrases, while the delegates exchanged glances that ranged from skeptical to openly contemptuous. "Sometimes the biggest risk," Miguel added, his voice low, "is taking no risk at all. This is completely and utterly unacceptable." Croft's voice, now stripped of its earlier calm, boomed across the ballroom as the Japanese delegation formally stood and began walking toward the exit. "We have invested months of work in this partnership." The lead Japanese investor, Hishimoto-san, stopped and gave a slight formal bow. His English was careful, precise, and limited. "Hishimoto Industries values precision, especially in communication. Without it, we cannot proceed." He turned to leave. His team fell in line behind him. The Germans began to gather their things. The momentum of failure was becoming an unstoppable avalanche. Sandra, the catering manager, appeared at Elara's side, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Vance, what are you doing just standing there? Back to your station, now!" Elara took a deep breath, the air tasting of expensive perfume and imminent disaster. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "But I can't." She set her silver coffee service down on a nearby table with a soft, definitive click, and then she walked directly toward the center of the room. The leader of the Japanese delegation had reached the grand ballroom doors when Elara's voice, clear and resonant, cut through the tense silence. "Hishimoto-san," she called out in flawless, formal Japanese, "please, allow me to explain the misunderstanding regarding the API licensing structure." The executive stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, his face a mask of undisguised astonishment. Every single eye in the room, executives, assistants, catering staff, snapped to the young black woman in the server's uniform, who was suddenly speaking fluent, business-level Japanese. "The integration flexibility is actually built into the core architecture," Elara continued, her voice gaining strength, her Japanese precise and confident. "The error in the translated material suggested restrictions that do not, in fact, exist in the actual agreement." Hishimoto-san approached her cautiously, his curiosity overriding his intention to leave. "You understand our specific concerns about market adaptation for our domestic platforms?" "Completely," Elara responded, still in perfect Japanese. The documentation incorrectly translated open-source components as fixed architecture elements. The very customization your Tokyo development team requires is fully supported and, in fact, encouraged. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Julian Croft stood frozen near the stage, his expression cycling through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, raw disbelief, and finally, a flicker of shrewd calculation. Hishimoto-san studied Elara, his gaze intense. "You work for Ethelred Innovations?" "No, sir," she answered, her voice unwavering. I'm working with the catering team tonight, but I understand what is being lost in translation here. She switched seamlessly to perfect, unaccented English. Mr. Croft, the primary concern of Hishimoto Industries is whether they can adapt your Nexus protocol for Japanese business culture without restriction. Your translated materials incorrectly suggested they cannot. That is not the case, is it? Croft, momentarily speechless, was jolted back to life by his primal business instincts. No, absolutely not. Complete customization is one of our core selling points. Elara turned back to Hishimoto-san, relaying this confirmation in Japanese, using the precise technical terminology that instilled immediate confidence. The executive's entire demeanor shifted. The tension in his shoulders eased. "You speak our language exceptionally well," he commented, a note of awe in his voice. "Where did you study?" "I am largely self-taught, supplemented with formal study," she replied honestly. "I also speak Mandarin, if you would prefer to include your Chinese partners in this crucial clarification." Without waiting for permission, she turned to the Chinese delegation and addressed them in flawless, articulate Mandarin, explaining the same fundamental misunderstanding from their unique perspective, referencing their specific concerns about platform integrity. The Chinese officials, who had been stone-faced and ready to depart, exchanged surprised glances, leaning forward in their chairs, their interest visibly reignited. Sandra, the catering manager, rushed to Elara's elbow, hissing in a furious whisper. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Before Elara could answer, Hishimoto-san spoke, his voice firm and clear. "We would like her to continue. Please." Julian Croft recovered quickly, his professional smile clicking back into place as he rapidly assessed this bizarre, unexpected development. "Miss," he raised a questioning eyebrow at Elara. "Vance. Elara Vance." "Miss Vance, it appears, has some unexpected language skills," Croft announced to the room, his tone a carefully calibrated mixture of amusement and opportunity. "Perhaps she can assist us while we await the arrival of our professional translators." The condescension was subtle, but it was there. This wasn't recognition. It was damage control. "I would be happy to help," Elara replied, her expression unreadable. She then turned back to the Chinese delegation and added in perfect Mandarin, "The security protocols were also egregiously mistranslated. Your concerns regarding data sovereignty are directly addressed in Section 4 of the primary agreement, which guarantees localized data storage on domestic servers." The Chinese delegates began speaking at once, firing off rapid, technical questions. Elara kept pace effortlessly, fielding their inquiries, translating their concerns to Croft, and relaying his answers with a clarity and precision that had been fatally absent all evening. "Perhaps we should all return to our seats," Hishimoto-san suggested, motioning to his team. The spell of failure had been broken. Croft seized the moment. "Excellent idea. Let's restart the presentation, shall we? Properly, this time." He turned to Elara, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "This is highly unorthodox. How many languages do you actually speak?" 9, she replied calmly. "All the ones you need tonight." His eyebrows shot up. 9? That's impossible. No one. Japanese, Mandarin, German, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and Swahili, she listed, her voice steady and even. Croft's assistants exchanged skeptical looks. One whispered to another, "She's probably just memorized a few key phrases in each one. There's no way she's fluent." As if on cue, the Saudi delegate approached, addressing Elara directly in a rapid, complex stream of Arabic. Without a moment's hesitation, she responded fluently, discussing a specific technical question about database architecture that had been mangled in their prepared materials. The delegate nodded, clearly satisfied. and then switched to testing her with a few phrases in a challenging regional dialect. Ilara adjusted seamlessly, even making a culturally appropriate note about formal business etiquette in her response. Croft's skepticism began to visibly crumble, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. "We should continue," Ilara suggested professionally, taking control of the room. "Everyone's time is valuable." Julian Croft studied her for a long, silent moment, the gears of calculation turning furiously behind his eyes. Finally, he gestured toward the presentation stage. "By all means, Miss Vance," he said, a new, strange note in his voice. "Show us what you can do." As the delegates resettled, a murmur of excited, multilingual conversation filled the room. The narrative of the night had irrevocably shifted. Croft guided Ilara toward the presentation area, his hand on her elbow, his grip just a fraction too tight. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, his voice a low, intense whisper. "If you embarrass my company with half-baked high school-level language skills, I will personally see to it that you never work in this city again, in any capacity." Ilara met his gaze without flinching. "I understand the stakes, Mr. Croft. Do you? This is a $500 million multinational deal, not a game." His CTO approached with the presentation clicker. "Sir, should we proceed with the full technical demonstration?" Croft's eyes were still locked on Ilara, his suspicion warring with a dawning, desperate hope. "She claims to be fluent in 9 languages. Forgive my skepticism, but that is extraordinarily unlikely, especially for someone—" He trailed off, but the implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "Someone like me," Ilara supplied silently, her voice calm. Croft's expression hardened. "Someone without formal credentials. What exactly qualifies you to handle international business negotiations of this magnitude?" "I have studied each of these languages for more than a decade," Ilara explained, her tone even and professional. "My mother is a linguistics professor at Columbia. I have completed advanced certification courses in—" "Anyone can claim anything," Croft interrupted, his voice sharp. "Memorizing a few phrases from an app is not fluency." It was then that the Brazilian executive, the one whose conversation about licensing terms Ilara had overheard earlier, stepped forward. "Her Portuguese was perfect," she announced to Croft, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "Not just the pronunciation, but the specific technical vocabulary. And her use of Japanese business honorifics was impeccable," added Hishimoto-san from his seat. Croft remained unconvinced, his mind searching for a logical explanation. Perhaps she simply prepared a few key languages for this specific event, hoping for an opportunity. The implication was clear. She was not a prodigy, but a calculating opportunist. "If you would prefer to continue without my assistance, Mr. Croft," Ilara offered, her voice cool, "I will gladly return to my duties with the catering staff." "Oi?" This sent a ripple of alarm through the delegates. The Kenyan representative stood up, his regal presence commanding attention. He spoke in Swahili, his tone firm. "We have waited months for this partnership. If this young woman can facilitate clear and honest communication, why would we hesitate?" Ilara, without being asked, translated his statement for Croft, her Swahili as flawless as her Japanese. Croft watched this exchange, his jaw tight. He was trapped. Proceed with the unknown, untested teenager, or watch $500 million walk out the door. The anger on his face was barely controlled. "This is highly, highly irregular." "So is dismissing the only person in the room who seems capable of making communication possible," the German investor noted dryly. Croft's assistant leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear, no doubt outlining the catastrophic financial implications of the delegates leaving now. After a long, tense moment, Croft forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Very well. Let us continue." Miss Vance will translate, while we await professional verification tomorrow. The condescending addendum was a final jab, a way to reassert his authority. This wasn't acceptance. It was a temporary truce, declared under duress. Ilara nodded professionally, ignoring the slight. Thank you, Mr. Croft. Shall we resume with the discussion on licensing terms? The negotiations began again, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Reed launched into his presentation, deliberately speaking at an accelerated pace, using dense, jargon-filled business terminology. It was a test, a clear attempt to trip her up. When he paused for her to translate his first point into Japanese for Hishimoto-san's delegation, his expression was a mask of smug anticipation. He expected her to stammer, to hesitate, to fail. Instead, she rendered his points with a fluid, effortless grace. She not only translated his words accurately, but also subtly adjusted his aggressive, American-style pitch to align with Japanese business communication norms, making it more precise, more respectful, and less overtly promotional. Hishimoto-san nodded, a look of deep approval on his face. Accurate and clear, he confirmed in English. Croft's eyes narrowed. He switched to the highly technical specifications of his Nexus protocol, describing proprietary algorithms with a cascade of specialized vocabulary designed to be untranslatable by an amateur. Again, Ilara translated smoothly into Japanese, then Mandarin, and then German, without missing a beat. The German investor commented aloud, his voice impressed. Her business German is excellent, a Frankfurt dialect, very precise. Croft became more desperate, introducing increasingly obscure technical terms. When Ilara translated a complex explanation of encryption protocols into Arabic, without a flicker of hesitation, the Saudi delegation exchanged amazed glances. Perhaps we should proceed to our specific questions now, the lead Saudi representative suggested, a clear sign that they trusted her far more than the official presentation. Our technical team had several concerns about the implementation timelines. Croft hesitated, clearly losing control of his own meeting. The delegates were now engaging directly with Ilara, bypassing his carefully orchestrated presentation. I would prefer we complete the prepared overview first, he countered weakly. The French delegate interjected in a rapid stream of French, posing a complex question about API integration. Ilara translated it perfectly for Croft. He is asking about the limitations on third-party integration, she explained, specifically whether the core architecture allows for the development of custom modules without compromising the system's security protocols. Croft blinked, momentarily stunned by the specificity of the question and her seamless handling of it. Ah, yes, that is correct, he admitted, caught off guard. The architecture does in fact support that flexibility. As Ilara translated his response back into French, the delegates leaned forward with a new energy, a flood of follow-up questions erupting in their respective languages. Questions that had been bottled up by the previous communication barriers were now flowing freely. Julian Croft could only watch as his meticulously structured presentation disintegrated into a dynamic, multilingual technical summit, with a teenage catering server he'd assaulted just hours earlier, acting as its unerring, authoritative hub. His expression hardened from skepticism to something that looked alarmingly like fear. As the technical discussions deepened, Ilara found herself at the epicenter of a complex, high-stakes, multilingual negotiation. The delegates began addressing their questions directly to her, their trust in her translations now absolute. They knew she understood not just the words, but the intent and nuance behind them. Croft, relegated to the role of a mere subject matter expert, observed this seismic shift in power with a tense, simmering resentment. During a brief pause while new documents were being distributed, he pulled Ilara aside, his voice a low, accusatory hiss. Quite the performance. Where exactly does a catering server learn international business law and advanced network architecture? I told you, I study, Elara replied, her voice even, refusing to be intimidated. Languages, technology, business, I read everything. Let me guess, Croft interrupted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Your mother is a linguistics professor, and your father is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, a surprisingly convenient background. His skepticism had now curdled into a pointed, ugly suspicion. My mother is a linguistics professor, Elara confirmed, her chin held high. My father drives a taxi. And on those salaries, you somehow mastered 9 languages to a level of business proficiency that surpasses my own executive team? Croft's voice was laced with disbelief. Who's in your ear, Vance? Which one of my competitors paid you to infiltrate this meeting? The accusation was so outrageous it momentarily stunned her into silence. No one is coaching me, Mr. Croft. He stepped closer, his physical presence imposing. No teenager masters business-level Japanese, Arabic, and Russian simultaneously without massive institutional backing. Tell me which company you're really working for. Was it Kenjutsu? Or maybe a shell corp for the Chinese government? Before she could respond, the German delegate approached with a question about a specific clause in the contract. Elara answered him in flawless German, explaining a nuanced legal term related to liability. When the delegate walked away satisfied, Croft resumed his interrogation, this time speaking loud enough for several nearby executives to overhear. I find it incredibly difficult to believe that someone with your background would have access to this level of specialized education without significant financial backing. The implication was as clear as it was vile. Her race and her apparent economic status made her abilities suspicious, not impressive. My background? Elara's voice was dangerously quiet, but steady. A young woman working a catering job suddenly manifests world-class language abilities at the exact moment a $500 million deal is about to collapse, Croft said, addressing the room now, his voice carrying. It simply doesn't add up. For the security of everyone involved, I have to be concerned about the possibility of corporate espionage. These negotiations involve proprietary next-generation technology. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Several delegates exchanged uncomfortable, uncertain glances. Elara felt the fragile foundation of acceptance she had just built cracking beneath her feet, replaced by the familiar, bitter landscape of suspicion. Once again, her abilities were not being celebrated. They were being treated as a threat, as something fraudulent and implausible. I am simply a student who happens to speak multiple languages, she stated firmly, her voice ringing with a truth that felt increasingly irrelevant. Nothing more. Asa, Croft's expression made it clear he didn't believe her for a second. The tension in the room escalated as he pulled his legal counsel aside, speaking in urgent, hushed tones while glancing repeatedly in Elara's direction. The delegates watched this disturbing development with growing alarm. Is there a problem? Hishimoto-san asked in Japanese, his voice edged with concern. Elara translated the question for the room, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling around her. Croft returned, his face set like stone. His decision had been made. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. However, in the interest of protecting the intellectual property of all parties involved, we will be pausing these negotiations until our contracted translation service arrives tomorrow morning. A wave of protests erupted in multiple languages. The Saudi delegation was already checking flight schedules on their phones. The Brazilian representatives began to gather their materials, their faces grim. This is completely unacceptable, the French executive declared in his native tongue. We were finally beginning to make genuine progress. Ilara translated his words faithfully, even as Croft's expression darkened. "Miss Vance," Croft announced, his voice cold and formal, "thank you for your assistance, but your services are no longer required. Please return to your duties with the catering staff." The dismissal was absolute and public. Sandra, the catering manager, appeared at the door, clearly summoned by one of Croft's assistants to escort Ilara away. Ilara felt the familiar, crushing pressure to comply, to shrink back into herself, to become invisible once more. But something inside her had irrevocably shifted. The delegates had seen her. They had heard her. They had recognized her abilities without prejudice or qualification. She would not be erased again. "With all due respect, Mr. Croft," she responded, her voice clear and carrying across the silent room. "The delegates have critical questions that need to be answered now. Postponing this meeting will not protect your intellectual property. It will kill this partnership." Croft strode toward her until he was inches from her face, his voice a menacing whisper. "You are a server. You have disrupted a billion-dollar negotiation. Return to your post now, or I will have you physically escorted from this building." It was then that the Kenyan representative stood, his voice booming with authority. "If she leaves, we leave. We have waited months for this level of clear communication, and we will not have it silenced." "Agreed," said Hishimoto-san, standing as well. "We are finally able to understand the technical specifications correctly, thanks to Miss Vance." One by one, other delegates stood in a silent, powerful show of solidarity. Julian Croft found himself completely and utterly cornered, outmaneuvered not by a corporate rival, but by the teenage server he had tried to break. The choice was stark: proceed with her, or lose the entire deal. His face flushed with a barely controlled apoplectic rage. "This is highly irregular," he repeated, the words sounding weak and hollow. "So is dismissing the only person making communication possible," the German investor retorted dryly. Croft's assistant whispered frantically in his ear again, the words market cap, stock price, and board of directors just barely audible. After a long, agonizing moment, Croft forced a tight, venomous smile. "Let us continue, then. Miss Vance will continue to translate, while we await professional verification tomorrow." The condescension was still there, a bitter aftertaste. This was not a victory. It was a temporary stay of execution. Ilara nodded professionally, her face betraying none of the turbulent emotions roiling within her. "Thank you, Mr. Croft. Shall we continue with the licensing terms?" The negotiations resumed with a new, ferocious intensity. With the communication barriers obliterated, the delegates unleashed a torrent of complex questions that had been suppressed for months. Ilara found herself at the heart of the storm, simultaneously interpreting technical specifications, dissecting legal clauses, and navigating delicate cultural business norms across all 9 languages. The Russian delegation is expressing concerns about their country's new data sovereignty legislation, she explained to Croft after a rapid-fire exchange in Russian. It requires all user data to be stored exclusively on servers located within their national borders. Croft, watching her like a hawk for any sign of faltering, nodded. "Our architecture fully supports regional data isolation. We can guarantee compliance." Ilara rendered this into perfect formal Russian, adding the appropriate business phrasing that visibly impressed the Russian delegation leader. As the discussions continued, she became a human switchboard, pivoting effortlessly from Japanese to Portuguese, from Arabic to German, her mind a dazzling kaleidoscope of syntax and vocabulary. She maintained a precise technical lexicon in each language, never confusing a term, never missing a nuance. When the Chinese delegation raised a new concern about encryption standards, she translated a series of complex cryptographic terms without a moment's hesitation. The pace of the meeting accelerated dramatically. Issues that had been intractable roadblocks for months were suddenly being resolved in minutes. The delegates, recognizing that her accuracy and comprehension far exceeded that of the prepared materials, began directing their questions almost exclusively through her, effectively cutting Croft's own team out of the loop. Croft watched this transformation with a complex, warring expression, the professional satisfaction of seeing his deal finally coming together, battling with the visible, personal discomfort of seeing his own authority usurped by Alara. When the Saudi delegation introduced a series of region-specific regulatory requirements, Alara not only translated the technical language, but added a layer of clarifying context. They are referring to the new GCC Unified Data Protection Framework that took effect last month, she explained to Croft's bewildered legal team. The Saudi representatives nodded, their faces alight with appreciation for her deep understanding of their business environment. "How did you know that detail about the framework?" Croft asked quietly during a brief pause to review documents. "I studied your company's public technical documentation online," she explained calmly. "While I was preparing for a business language certification exam, I used real-world technical specifications for context. Your public developer forums covered these specifications in detail." Croft's skepticism, his last line of defense, finally began to visibly crumble. No earpiece, no corporate espionage could explain this depth and breadth of knowledge, this seamless fusion of technical, legal, and cultural expertise. For the first time, he seemed to be entertaining the terrifying possibility that her abilities were entirely, authentically, her own. 3 hours into the grueling negotiations, they hit a wall. A critical impasse emerged between the Japanese and Chinese delegations over data-sharing protocols. Each cited regional regulatory requirements that appeared to be mutually exclusive. "This is a deal-breaker," Hishimoto-san stated flatly in Japanese. "We cannot and will not compromise on our user privacy frameworks." The Chinese delegation leader responded just as firmly in Mandarin, insisting that their government's position on data integrity was equally non-negotiable. The productive atmosphere in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by a tense, hostile stalemate. Croft's team looked on, bewildered and helpless. "What's happening?" Croft demanded, his voice tight with anxiety. Alara translated both positions, her mind racing, analyzing the technical specifications she had memorized. A sudden spark of insight hit her. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding of terminology. They are using different cultural and legal terms to describe the same technical approach." "Explain," Croft commanded. "In the Japanese business context, data sovereignty emphasizes user consent protocols and data portability," Alara clarified. "In the Mandarin business context, data integrity boundaries focuses on the physical location of data storage. But functionally, they are both seeking the same outcome: secure, localized data management. They are arguing about the name, not the function." She turned to both delegations, speaking first in Japanese and then in Mandarin, explaining how Croft's Nexus technology could satisfy both of their requirements simultaneously through a little-known feature called Regionally Adaptive Compliance Modules, a capability buried deep within the technical documentation, but not highlighted in any of the marketing presentations. "Is this accurate?" Croft asked his chief technical officer, who was frantically scrolling through specifications on his tablet. "Actually, yes," the CTO confirmed, his voice filled with shock. "It's a new feature in version 4.2. It allows for simultaneous compliance with multiple, even conflicting, regulatory frameworks." "How in the world did she know that?" Alara addressed both delegations directly, drawing a simple diagram on a nearby tablet. She illustrated how data could flow through separate, regionally defined compliance gateways, thereby maintaining both the Japanese standard for user consent and the Chinese requirement for physical data location. The atmosphere in the room transformed for a second time. Both delegation leaders studied the diagram intently, asking a series of highly technical follow-up questions, which Alara translated and answered with stunning clarity. "This solution is acceptable. It satisfies all our requirements," the Chinese representative finally confirmed. "And ours as well," Hishimoto-san agreed, a look of profound relief on his face. Julian Croft watched this exchange with an expression of pure, unadulterated amazement. His $500 million deal had nearly been scuttled by a simple terminology misunderstanding that his entire high-paid team had missed, a problem that was immediately diagnosed and solved by the teenage caterer he had dismissed and humiliated just hours earlier. One by one, the final obstacles dissolved under the clarifying power of Alara's communication. When the Kenyan delegation raised concerns about implementation costs for smaller, emerging markets, she smoothly explained a tiered pricing structure that Croft had mentioned in an obscure industry podcast interview, but had not been included in the formal materials. As she conveyed this in Swahili, adding culturally appropriate reassurances about long-term partnership, the Kenyan delegates visibly relaxed. The final technical details were ironed out, and with a collective sigh of relief, Reed called for a brief recess before the formal signing. As the delegates dispersed for refreshments, conversing animatedly in their native languages about the unexpected breakthrough, Croft approached Alara. His earlier hostility was gone, replaced by a look of profound reassessment. "That feature you identified," he said, his voice quiet. "The regional compliance modules. It wasn't in any of our presentation materials." "I read about it in your public developer documentation," Alara explained again. "When I study a language for business, I use real technical specifications to build my vocabulary and contextual understanding." Croft just shook his head slightly. "Our own professional translation team, a firm we paid over 6 figures, missed that terminology discrepancy for 6 months." The admission clearly cost him something. His gaze shifted from skepticism to a cautious, dawning respect. It was the look of a man forced to recalculate a fundamental equation he thought he understood. 9 languages, he said, almost to himself. Actually fluent, not just conversational, technical, legal, and cultural fluency. "Yes," Alara nodded. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked, the question genuine this time. "Truthfully, I told you. My mother is a linguistics professor. My father is a taxi driver. And I practice. Constantly, every single day. I use business and technical materials because that's what the professionals at the UN need to master. And that's my goal." Croft's expression continued its slow, seismic transformation, from dismissal to doubt, to grudging acceptance, to a dawning recognition of something truly extraordinary. "Earlier today," he said, his voice low, his eyes finally meeting hers without a trace of condescension, "I told you to stick to serving drinks." "That was a mistake," Alara supplied calmly, refusing to let him off the hook easily. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he admitted, clearly. When the meeting reconvened, the power dynamic in the room had solidified. The delegates now addressed their questions directly to Alara, no longer even bothering to go through Croft. Her role had evolved from emergency translator to trusted arbiter of communication, the central, indispensable hub of the entire deal. Hishimoto-san approached her during the final document review, speaking in Japanese. "Vansa-san, your abilities are truly extraordinary, beyond anything I have ever witnessed. When you complete your university studies, please contact me directly. My company is always seeking talent of your caliber." He handed her his business card with a respectful bow. One by one, other delegation leaders followed suit, pressing their cards into her hand with similar offers and words of praise. The Saudi executive mentioned connections within their diplomatic corps. The Brazilian representative suggested a paid internship in São Paulo. Reed observed this procession. This spontaneous recruitment fair centered on his caterer, with a complex, unreadable expression. When the Chinese delegation leader formally requested her business card, Ilara smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm just working with the catering team tonight. I don't have one." This revelation sent a fresh ripple of astonishment through the room. She wasn't a professional translator, not a corporate representative, but a remarkably gifted young woman who just happened to be in the right place at the most critical time. The Kenyan representative approached Croft directly. "Your translator is an exceptional asset, Mr. Croft. You must value her greatly at your company." Croft's hesitation was telling. "She's actually not with our company. She was just helping us out tonight." "Just helping?" The executive raised a skeptical eyebrow. A talent like that should be cultivated, nurtured, not left to serve canapes. Croft nodded slowly, his perspective visibly, painfully, continuing to shift. As the meeting moved toward its successful conclusion, even Croft's own team members began to approach Ilara with a new reverence. "That was incredible," whispered his marketing director. "You single-handedly saved this entire deal." From across the room, she saw Sandra, the catering manager, watching her with a stunned, unreadable expression. Carlos caught her eye and gave her a huge, triumphant thumbs up. The simple, honest pride in his expression meant more to her than all the executive acknowledgments combined. The formal signing ceremony concluded with enthusiastic handshakes and photos. A $500 million multinational deal had been secured, resurrected from the ashes of miscommunication. When the last of the delegates had departed, Croft gestured for Ilara to join him in a quiet corner of the now emptying ballroom. "So," he began, his entire demeanor recalibrated, "the Princeton linguistics program?" Ilara nodded, surprised he remembered that detail from their first hostile encounter. "Full scholarship?" "Partial," she corrected. "I'm still working to cover the remaining gap." Croft considered this for a long moment. Ethelred Innovations has an educational support program for uniquely promising talent, full tuition, a living stipend, guaranteed paid internships during semester breaks. Ilara blinked, the words taking a moment to register. "Are you offering me a position?" "I am," Croft confirmed. "The International Relations Division. We clearly have a desperate need for someone with your unique skills." The offer hung in the air between them, a life-altering opportunity born from conflict and humiliation. "Earlier today, you physically pushed me aside," Ilara stated, her voice quiet but firm. "You told me I should stick to serving drinks." Croft, to his credit, had the grace to look genuinely uncomfortable. "I was wrong," he said, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "Spectacularly, unforgivably wrong. Only because you discovered I have value to you." "No," he corrected, and she saw a flicker of genuine introspection in his eyes. "Because I made an assumption based on what I saw, not who you are. Talent comes in packages we don't always recognize." Ilara weighed his words, balancing the raw opportunism with the glint of nascent sincerity. "I would need the details of the offer in writing," she said finally, her voice all business, "including the educational support package and a clear definition of the role and its expectations." Croft nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. He extended his hand. "Welcome to Ethelred Innovations, Miss Vance." She accepted the handshake, her grip firm, recognizing in that single moment both a profound personal victory and the immense weight of the responsibility she was about to undertake. 6 months later, Ilara Vance sat at a polished mahogany conference table in the international headquarters of Ethelred Innovations. On the wall in her parents' small apartment, her framed acceptance letter from Princeton hung proudly next to her new business cards. Ilara Vance, International Relations Liaison. The educational support program had covered her full tuition, allowing her to work remotely for the company while she attended her classes. Her very first project, overhauling and culturally nuancing all of Ethelred's technical documentation, had already resulted in a measurable increase in international client satisfaction. As executives filed into the room for the quarterly review, Ilara nodded warmly to Miguel's cousin, who was now heading up a new development team for emerging markets, a division that had been created and expanded, rather than facing the mass layoffs that would have followed the deal's collapse. Julian Croft entered last. He acknowledged her with a nod of genuine respect, a daily reminder of a transformation more significant than any job title. He had become her unexpected and most vocal advocate, consistently highlighting her contributions in company-wide communications and at industry panels. When a new, young catering server entered with a coffee service, Ilara made a point of making eye contact, smiling, and thanking him by name. She had successfully insisted that all vendor staff name tags become standard protocol at company events. It was a small change, but a meaningful one. "Before we begin," Croft announced to the room, "I'd like to acknowledge Ilara's groundbreaking work on our international communication protocols. Our client satisfaction metrics in non-English-speaking markets have increased by 43% since she implemented her new system." The room applauded, and Ilara accepted the recognition with a calm, confident smile. She remembered the girl who used to hide her flashcards between serving trays, the girl who was terrified of being seen. That girl, and her invisibility, were now firmly in the past. As the meeting concluded, Croft asked her to stay behind. Through the expansive glass walls of the conference room, they watched the executives dispersing, conversing easily in multiple languages, a new norm at a company that was now truly global. "I received an interesting call today," Croft mentioned casually. "The International Youth Linguistics Association. They want you to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference." Ilara raised her eyebrows. "Is that so?" "It is," he confirmed. "You're becoming quite the role model. The girl who spoke 9 languages and completely changed a global company's entire approach to communication. And saved a $500 million deal in the process," she added with a small smile. "There is that too," Croft acknowledged with a wry grin. "Though I maintain I would have figured something out, eventually." "Eventually might have been too late," she countered gently. He nodded, his expression turning serious. "How many others are out there, do you think? People with extraordinary world-changing abilities who are being overlooked, dismissed, simply because they don't fit our preconceived notions of what excellence is supposed to look like?" Ilara considered the question, her gaze drifting out over the city skyline. "Probably more than we can possibly imagine." "That's the question that keeps me up at night now," Croft admitted, his voice raw with a newfound humility. "Who else am I not seeing?" Ilara gathered her tablet and her notes, preparing to head to her evening class. "The real question, Mr. Croft, isn't who you might be overlooking. It's why we have created a world where so many people need to be exceptional just to be seen at all." She left him alone in the conference room to ponder the weight of that thought, knowing that some translations change more than just words. They change the world. So, where might your own unrecognized talents be hiding, right there in plain sight? If this story moved you, if it sparked something in you, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. Do you know someone like Ilara? Someone whose incredible talents are being overlooked? Someone who deserves to be seen? Share this video with them. Let them know that their time is coming. And to make sure you don't miss our next powerful story, subscribe to Beat Stories for more life-changing narratives that reveal the extraordinary hiding within ordinary lives. Remember, every single person you pass on the street has hidden depths, a story you can't see, talents waiting to be discovered. What might you be overlooking today? Turn on those notifications, and I'll see you in the next one.